believe the battery's low already. Thanks for making sure I was home, FedEx. I've been using the Go 2 and filming parts of this review for about 2 months, on and off. And I'll be using sections from all of these throughout the video, so it will be jumping around a fair bit. This has taken more time to make than most of my camera reviews. Way more time than it should have done. I've never reshot a review as many times as I have with this. It became an obsession. An unhealthy obsession in trying to achieve perfectionism. And if you are watching this, that's good, because it means I was finally able to let go. Now, some people will be justifiably saying, it's just a fun consumer camera. Why are you bothering? The reason is simple. This camera could be useful in so many different ways. And that's why this video goes way more in depth than any other review you'll find about it on YouTube. Now, I do look at it in that simple way as a wearable lifestyle camera for consumer. But as it's being marketed as an action camera too, and with a price tag to match that, I have to go deeper. And as I was using it more, the thing that I came to realise was that the size of it really does open up so many different creative uses, and that's what excited me the most. Across all these different uses, I will be looking at how the camera performs image-wise, but also how practical it is to use. The camera is so much fun, but it does have a number of issues which could be improved with firmware, and some which can't. And some of these issues can be a pain, no matter how you use it, even the most basic use. But by watching this video, I will be making things much easier for you. From how to get the best looking footage, to how to improve the mounts with simple homebrew fixes. So I think this is about the 4th time I've gone out to film the bulk of this review. Each time I've gone back and looked at the footage and thought, I can do better. Whether it's about the placement of the camera or the settings, trying to understand what's going on. And really, it's a bit ridiculous because this is a very, very simple camera. The whole concept of it is very simple, but I've made it really complicated, which is what I do with the reviews. I don't seem to do things simply. If I'm going to do it, I really need to do it properly or not do it at all. I'm currently recording in the highest resolution, which is 1440p, and that is 30p. There's also 50p, but there's no 2425p right now, but there is apparently coming in firmware. So 30p it is, but I'm not going to put this video out at 30p, I'm going to convert it to 25. I've not put out a 30p video since 2009, and I'm not going to start now. The original Insta360 GO came out in the summer of 2019, and I did a review of it in my beloved Skillshare. Let's go sit at the front, come on, little babes. I enjoyed the simplicity of it, and especially the first person perspective you got whilst wearing the camera on the pendant. It's just, the image sucked. I'll see you tomorrow. Despite that, I still used it until I got the replacement. Because in my camera reviews, it was really nice to have this first person view. I did have to do some heavy work in post to really stylize it with film convert nitrates, and because otherwise it just wouldn't cut in. Two-handed operation with this lens mount, and that's what I was really excited about the Go 2, to have a much better quality image, so I wouldn't have to do this hyper stylizing. Is the image better? Yeah, without question it's better. Is it great? No. I'm not a big fan of walking and talking vlog style. I'm not a vlogger, I don't like it at all. I get very self-conscious about it. I don't mind walking and driving, no. I don't mind driving and talking, but yeah, I don't like the actual walking part. Over the past couple of months, I've used it for behind-the-scenes filming, whilst using the Zcam F8, the F6, as well as the Sony FX3 and A1. Most of the shots were first-person view shots, much like I used the original one. But I also mounted the camera onto the cameras for some interesting shots. One thing to remember is the minimum focus of the camera is about 45 centimeters. So if you are holding something in front of you, or it's attached to things like this, then make sure you take that into account.
She's come to greet you, she was upstairs.
Hi Dad.
What's the matter, Rosie?
This brings us onto the first issue, and that's how problematic the pendant can be in getting the angle you want. So this was the same with the original Go. I love the pendant, it's a really lovely, simple solution to getting this viewpoint. It's magnetic, as is the camera, although quite a weak magnet on the camera. You're supposed to put the pendant under your shirt, make sure you have it the right way around, and the camera sits on the outside of your shirt. This makes it look nice and neat, and as long as your shirt isn't really baggy, it will keep the camera relatively well in place. Because the t-shirt is between the pendant and the camera, it does mean the magnetism isn't as strong. And it's very easy to knock off. I've knocked it off a lot. This is what I'm saying. Now you can wear the pendant over the shirt, of course, and that will make the magnetic bond more secure. But then without the shirt between them, it bounces around a lot, and the stabilization can be pretty jerky when this happens. Really nice though. Also, the camera tends to be pointing too high when I wear it due to the shape of my chest. You may not have this issue depending on your body shape. You can adjust the angle a little bit in post, but not really enough. And also when you wear more clothes than just a t-shirt, which is basically whenever I've been outside for this review, you can often end up with it being obscured by your coat or whatever else you're wearing. After a huge amount of research and hours put in trying to find solutions for you over these past few weeks, I have a series of them. And this is the first one, solving the pendant issue. First and easiest option is to buy a second pendant. You can get them from Insta360 and they are cheap. Put one under your shirt and then the original one over your shirt and they stick together, making a really nice magnetic mount for your camera. Yes, it's not as neat, but it's much more stable and less likely to fall off. To make it almost impossible to fall off, just put an elastic band around the camera and the pendant. Don't worry, the pendants will still stick together and the camera is now really lovely and secure, so it won't fall off. If you're wearing loose clothes or you just don't want to wear a second pendant over your shirt, you could use something like I made, using this old GoPro strap, adding a piece of strong Velcro in the middle. And on the pendant that goes under your shirt, on the part that faces your chest, you stick the other piece of the Velcro. This gives you a really solid magnetic mount under your shirt. And using this in combination with the second pendant and then an elastic band, you have a really solid mount. One of the reasons it bounces around so much is the pendant and the camera, they're both very light, so adding weight onto it is an option. Now this solution is quite ugly, but it's just to show you how much less it waggles when you have more weight on it. This is actually an old door hinge with some Velcro over it, which I attached to the back of the pendant. See, it's much better. The pendant really could do with being heavier, please. Insta360, not crazy heavy, but just a bit heavier. To fix the issue with the camera pointing too high when it's on the pendant, there are a couple of options. You do need to use the double pendant as a base. Using this nice hat mount that comes with the camera, super glue a metal plate onto the back of it and put it on the pendant. It has a nice grip, and because the angle can be adjusted with it, you solve that issue. An elastic band will again make it more secure. The other option is great for when your clothes are getting in the way. Use the double pendant as a base again. Take the pivot stand, and we'll talk more about this a bit later, and glue another piece of metal on the back, just like you did with the baseball cap mount. Then you put it onto the pendant, and it should stick nice and solidly. With the pivot stand, it's a little bit of a heavier setup, so I do recommend using the chest strap as well. So you've got some really good rigidity there. So I have the band around my chest with the Velcro, a pendant onto that Velcro, and another pendant on top of that, and pivot to give me some nice stability and also get past the scarf and close. Yeah, works well, right? So there we go. That's your first person issue solved with some very cheap solutions. I wish they made it in black because it does stand out a bit. I suppose I could always make it black myself. Which brings me neatly onto the sponsor of this video, Skillshare, an online community with thousands of classes covering all sorts of things. I'm often browsing on here to see if there's anything of interest. There's a class with Sarah Dici, rhymes with Peachy, about vlogging.
There is the action adventure camera, so that's similar to a GoPro. So they are very small in size and you can attach them to your person and they're typically waterproof.
That's not small. This is small. I used to love painting, but I've not done it in years. Let's see if I can brush up on it and see what these classes are like. So I did watch every single class, but strangely there was nothing as niche as painting your camera. Maybe I can make a class for them if this works out well. Hi Paz, I'm just painting. Yeah, that does not look good. What a muppet. Thankfully, the paint I used is water soluble and the camera is waterproof. The first 1,000 people to click the link in the description below will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. And after that, it's about $10 a month. Look what they actually sell. Yep, definitely a muppet. Now onto the shooting modes, the stabilization, and why you don't always want to use it. First off, I recommend that you shoot in Pro mode 99% of the time, rather than standard mode. In standard mode, the aspect ratio and field of view, which you set via the app or the controller, are recorded into the actual file, as well as the stabilization. The advantage of recording this way is it's much quicker to use the files as you don't need to process them. And also the files are a bit smaller because it isn't recording as much of the image. In Pro mode, all these settings can be chosen after the recording in the phone or computer app, because the camera records the whole circular fish eye image. This gives you way more options for getting the shots and composition that you want. You also get the way better flow state stabilization, which does a terrific job. Now, it's not magic and you can still get bounce when walking, especially if your pendant isn't solid, so make sure you fix that. You also have the option of horizon leveling, which is absolutely key for a camera that is rarely exactly level when it's mounted just because it's so small. You can turn this off and just have flow state working in the app before you process it, and this is especially useful if you're going to put the camera on an FPV drone. The standard mode has no horizon leveling, so if you're just going to wear the camera, you're going to get some pretty disastrous results if it isn't dead straight. In fact, most of the time, you're not going to get great results with standard mode stabilization unless you're holding it and keeping a close eye on the orientation of the camera.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate it. What are you doing now?
Flow state is really great, but far from perfect. It can create some very ugly image issues when there's certain textures in the frame, and most definitely in low light conditions. Like any electronic stabilization, whether it's done in camera or in post, it needs a nice high shutter speed. Put this in the fridge to get it to cool down quicker. Because the camera needs defined edges to get the best results. When you're moving, the motion blur from a shutter that isn't fast enough gives you too much motion blur, and that's when you get these artifacts. In auto mode, the camera will drop the shutter speed before it will increase the ISO. Now you can change the camera settings to shutter priority, so it will increase the ISO instead. Now that will help with those artifacts, but then you create a whole new problem. With mechanical and optical stabilization, the image is being stabilized as it's being recorded. How high your ISO is and how much noise there is in the image is irrelevant. But because Flow State does the stabilization in post, it's trying to stabilize everything. Yes, it's trying to stabilize the noise. Here I've removed the noise in the export, and because of the way that noise is now moving, it looks pretty bad. When you use something like Neat Video in post, you're also going to have similar issues, but not quite as bad. Because this is Pro mode, I can turn off the stabilization and show you what it looks like before it starts stabilizing the noise. Yes, it's a lot jerkier because there's no stabilization, but you can see the noise moving as it's supposed to. As I'm relatively stable on this shot, here it is with the remove grain option from the app, and you can see it cleans up pretty well. And now with some film convert nitrate to add some film grain to make it look a little bit less plasticky, just film grain, and I've used this on quite a few of the shots and it really does help. I know if you're watching this on a mobile phone, and for most people this is total overkill, but this is information that will help you get better results. But in standard mode, the electronic stabilization is done as it's being recorded. Now it will still suffer from the same motion blur issues with too slow a shutter speed, but it doesn't stabilize the noise, so it looks much better.
Obviously, this is not a low light camera. But if you are going to shoot in low light, then I wouldn't shoot in Pro mode because of that issue with that stabilization and what happens to the noise when it tries to stabilize the noise. I would go into standard mode. At least it isn't stabilizing the noise. Or just don't shoot in low light. Or get a different camera. I hear the A7S III is quite good in low light. I think it's a little bit more money though. Maybe.
I am of course joking about the A7S III. They are such different cameras and it's unfair to compare, but as I was out filming with them both, I may as well show some of the nice shots I got that evening. The main reasons you don't want stabilization on is when you're mounting the camera to a moving object that is in frame. In the opening section of this video, I had the camera on a selfie stick attached to my body using a GoPro harness to make a snorri cam. With the stabilization off, I was steady in the frame. Most of the time, as this setup isn't the most stable. The same when I put the camera on the box here just before the unboxing. If you enable flow state stabilization, the box is no longer nice and static in the frame because it is stabilizing that whole image. A completely different look and nowhere near as nice. And for most of the car shots. If your camera is pointing outside and you don't get any of the car on, you want flow state on. But if the car is in frame, you generally want to turn it off so the car is nice and static in frame and the background moves and bounces. This is a much more natural look, rather than this car floating around. Actually, this is completely applicable to any camera with electronic stabilization or optical stabilization. You want to turn all of that stuff off. I did turn on flow state when I was filming myself in my Fiat, as the car vibrates a lot more than my Mitsubishi. It does mean there's a little bit of floating, but not that much. It's better than with it turned off, as the camera vibrates way too much. And that's one of the huge pluses of being able to choose in post whether you want it on or off. If it was baked in, I would be stuck with the vibrations. And here you can see it with it on and off. With the flow state on shot, the steering wheel is drifting in the frame. There are some other shooting modes, but I haven't really used them much. There is a dedicated time shift mode, which is basically just video mode, and then the app decides where it should be sped up. I just simply do it myself in the app by recording Pro Video, and then speeding it up where I want it to be, and add motion blur. but I did rather like the 120 frames per second HD slow motion. I didn't really expect much from it at all, but I was pleasantly surprised. Now there is flow state, but no horizon leveling, so just be careful when shooting. And with the camera being waterproof to 5 meters, I was really happy with the shots I got when the Thames did its daily flooding with high tide.
Filming underwater. Filming underwater.
The biggest selling point for the camera for me is the size. It's tiny and this opens up lots of creative opportunities for you. Some I've already shown, but here are some more.
Nice foreground action.
Most of the time it's for mounting on objects, so its flow state's off in Pro mode. And here are some ways that I've mounted the camera to get some of these creative shots. The pivot mount is a good one, as underneath the sheath you've got a sticky surface that seems to stick pretty well to most surfaces. It's great for quickly putting the camera anywhere. You will need to wash it off after each time you stick it to something. As the camera is magnetic, you can also quickly put it onto a metal surface like this. So that's where my modification to my pivot mount comes in. I've shown you it with just a metal plate on there. Because I have 2 cameras, I have 2 pivot mounts. One with the metal plate that you've seen, and on the other one, I put 3 little magnets on. I didn't have a single big one, which would be better. Most likely you've only got one, so put the metal plate on it, and then just get a separate magnet which you can just put on that metal plate as and when needed. So now I can put the camera with the pivot mount in those places where I was just putting the camera before, and angle it to how I want it to be. Just be careful where you store the magnet. Don't keep it next to the camera because it could screw up your gyro stabilization. So if you have accidentally left it next to the camera, just go into the app and run the gyro calibration. Other ways you can mount it are via simple clamps and the cradle with its 1/4-20 mounting hole. There will be a 1/4-20 pivot stand coming out, or it's already out, like the one for the original, and that will be great to have. I don't have one, so I use the cradle. It's not ideal as the hinge doesn't lock, so it could move, but it is quite stiff.
I wanted to try out this little rig, not for taking photos with obviously because of where the camera is, just for a interesting perspective, because I've done some other ones, but I think this will work quite well. It's just going through bits and pieces I've got in the drawer and then seeing what works.
You can also use some really simple clamps and just put little magnets on them, and even just elastic bands. For these shots I used my Moser Slipod with the selfie stick attached with blue tack on the end. I don't recommend blue tack because the camera gets quite hot whilst recording and it makes the camera fall off. So I made this little coupler with a metal plate stuck onto it, much better. And for these sort of shots you could use any slider in combination with the selfie stick. And last but not least is CAD-CAM. Something I did with the original Go, and it was okay, but with the Go 2's superior image and stabilization, I was able to get much better shots. It's very challenging, especially when they move fast. I used the baseball cap mount clipped onto their collar. Percy didn't seem to mind it at all.
Well done!
I know this is a long video, but it's almost there-ish. I've mentioned the cradle, and this is the single best accessory for the camera. It's a Bluetooth controller. It charges the camera, and you can also shoot using it, which is an important thing because the original cradle didn't do that with the Go 1. Controlling the camera from the controller is much better than just operating the camera on its own. The best option is to use the app to shoot a live preview, but it's not very practical, is it, to be holding your phone and to be filming at the same time. Just be careful when using the cradles. It can easily default to standard mode when you open it up, and you don't want to do that. Always check, check, check. In fact, a good quarter of my shots that I filmed over these past couple of months, I had to chuck away because they were in standard mode when I thought they were in pro mode. It also has these neat little feet to make a little tripod base for the cradle. They are a little bit easy to pull out, so be careful not to lose them. The battery life of the camera is short, it's about 30 minutes, and that's not just recording time, that's just as it's on. If the cradle is at 100% battery, then it should charge your camera up about 3 times or so. I keep the cradle topped up via the USB connector into a battery pack. Now you have to use a USB-C to USB cable to both charge the cradle and if you want to offload directly to your computer. This is what cable the camera comes with. If you want to plug it into a USB-C battery or USB computer, it won't work. You need to have either a dongle or an adapter between that cable and the computer, and then it will work. One other annoyance is the placement of the USB-C port. If you are using a selfie stick, you cannot have a USB cable plugged in at the same time, as there's simply no space. So I knocked up a quick solution using a 1/4 to 1/4 screw with the head cut off. And I then used that with a 1/4 coupler to connect up to the selfie stick. And this gives me enough space to plug in my right angle USB-C cable. So the battery life isn't ideal on the camera, but as long as you make sure you put it in the cradle frequently and that cradle is kept topped up, you can easily keep going all day. Unfortunately, there's nowhere near enough storage space to last all day, and this is the single biggest issue the camera has. It has about 27 gigabytes of usable storage space, and even at the low bit rate of about 50 megabits a second in H.264, it doesn't give you a huge amount of space. I get roughly 40 minutes or so, which is nowhere near enough for a day of capturing bits and pieces. To free up the memory when you're out and about, you have to send over Wi-Fi to the mobile app, and it takes ages. I did a test whilst writing this script, and my full Go 2 took 45 minutes to transfer 27 gigabytes to my iPhone. This is simply far too long. It needs to have at least 128 gigabytes of memory, either via a micro SD card or internally. But this could be too much for people to offload to their phones unless they have phones with large storage. After all, this is being marketed and priced as an action camera, and they all have removable media. If they did increase the memory for the Go 3, they just need to be careful with the price. It's already expensive at $300 compared to the $200 of the original one, so this is not really a spontaneous purchase for many. And if they increase that price too much, they could, well, price it out of the consumer market. H.265 recording is coming to the camera, so that might help with storage, but most likely it will just be the same bitrate, but just less compressed due to the efficiency of HEVC. And to be totally frank, it needs it. The image looks absolutely fine on the mobile phone, but as soon as you look at it on a bigger device, that's when you see all the problems it has. This is down to many reasons. It's overly compressed, it's way too over-sharpened, and something I go on about all the time when I review small cameras, but nothing ever changes. There's also some strong noise reduction being applied to the recorded image before you even go to process it and have that option to add even more noise reduction. This all creates ugly artifacts. The recorded circular image is 2880 by 2880, and if you look at it like that, it's okay. Yes, it has the compression and over-sharpening visible, but when you process it, you amplify those issues massively. I took a native image and I applied manual dewarping to try and get it to look like an exported WIDE file, and the results were not even close to a 1:1 pixel sample. All I've done here is overlay the export onto the original image, which has dimensions of 2880 by 2880, and showing you the actual recorded resolution. Those pixels are blown up and stretched, and more so when the flow state is enabled. This is why the image can look less than stellar. I personally avoid exporting narrow as much as possible. Even though your export is the same size as your wide exports, you have cropped in a lot on that image, and so you're just magnifying the issues even more. So considering what's needed to be done to the recorded image to get it to a usable state, it's not surprising it doesn't come close to action cameras like the GoPro's, Osmo Action, and Insta360's own 1R. So how can they make the image better? Well, a better lens that doesn't need such intense dewarping would help, as would reducing that nasty artificial sharpening and bringing down that noise reduction. When you have small sensor cameras like this, when everything is pretty much in focus and generally moving, the compression challenges are absolutely enormous. When they implement H.265, if they did increase the bitrate, it would definitely help, but then that will result in even less recording capacity. If you want the best results, I would recommend using the desktop app because it lets you export in ProRes 422. You're much more limited in bitrate and quality when you export from the mobile phone app. One key bit of advice, try not to use remove grain too much because it really does take away so much detail. And never use Color Plus. Oh, and Insta360, please add an undo function in your apps. Considering how simple this camera is, I've spent a lot of time really going into it, and I have been quite hard on it at times, but I've also given it a lot of love. I wouldn't have gone to the huge effort I've made for this video if I didn't think it had a lot of potential. Many of the issues I have with it will probably need to be addressed in the Go 3, but that doesn't make the Go 2 useless, far from it. And whilst it doesn't give me an image as good as I want, it does improve on the Go 1 enormously. And I am 100% certain I will be using it in my future review videos for all those behind the scenes shots, as it's just so easy to use. Certainly way easier than making this review, that's for sure.